A teenage girl, disoriented and barefoot, runs through the streets late at night. She stumbles upon a police officer, desperate for help. But as she begs to be saved from her own father, the search for answers leads to a discovery no one could have imagined. When the truth is more dangerous than the escape, how far will they go to survive? This is the story that will leave you speechless. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any inspiring stories I share. Lana's feet pounded against the wet pavement as she ran through the dimly lit streets of Las Cruces. The city seemed alive with shadows, each corner concealing something she couldn't see but desperately wanted to escape. The night air was thick and sticky, clinging to her skin like a smothering blanket. Her chest burned with each labored breath, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Behind her, the life she was running from loomed like a dark storm, ready to swallow her whole. The soles of her bare feet were torn and raw, each step a fresh wave of pain. Small rocks and broken glass bit into her skin, but the ache was drowned by the terror flooding her veins. Her worn backpack swung against her back with every step, its weight both a comfort and a reminder of what little she had left. A sharp noise, maybe a car backfiring, maybe something worse, made her flinch and glance over her shoulder. The street behind her was empty, but that didn't calm her. Her mind played tricks on her now, turning shadows into threats, silence into pursuit. When she turned back, she saw it, a patrol car parked beneath a flickering streetlight. Relief surged through her, overwhelming her exhaustion. Her legs felt like they might give out, but she forced herself forward, her pace quickening despite the fiery protest in her muscles. The officer standing beside the car seemed distracted at first, adjusting his belt and glancing at his watch. But then his head turned sharply as she stumbled into view. His stance shifted, his body tensing as he took in the sight of her. "Please." Lana's voice was raw, cracking as she tried to speak. She reached out toward him, her fingers trembling. "You have to help me." Detective Raul Martinez stepped toward her, his dark eyes narrowing with concern. He was tall, his broad shoulders filling the space between her and the car. To Lana, he looked both intimidating and safe, a paradox she clung to desperately. "Hey, slow down," he said, his tone calm but firm. He crouched slightly, bringing himself to her eye level. "What's going on? Are you hurt?" Tears spilled down Lana's cheeks as she clutched the straps of her backpack, her knuckles white. "It's my dad," she gasped, her words tumbling out in fragments. "He's not my real dad. He's hurting me. Please don't make me go back. He'll kill me." Martinez's jaw tightened, his sharp features hardening. He didn't need her to explain further. The bruises on her thin arms, the terror in her voice, it told him everything he needed to know. "All right," he said firmly, his voice steady but kind. "You're safe now. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Let's get you somewhere safe first, and then you can tell me everything." "Okay." Lana nodded, though her sobs continued to shake her small frame. She allowed him to guide her to the patrol car, his hand lightly resting on her shoulder as if to shield her from the world. The car door creaked as he opened it, and Lana hesitated for a moment before climbing inside. The seat was cool against her legs, and the smell of leather and faint coffee filled her senses. She curled into the corner of the seat, clutching her backpack tightly to her chest. "Wait here," Martinez said, closing the door gently. As he stepped away to radio for backup, Lana's wide eyes darted around the darkened street. She still felt exposed, as if the shadows might reach out and drag her back to the nightmare she had fled. Martinez's voice was calm but authoritative as he spoke into his radio. "I have a young female, approximately 13 or 14, possibly a victim of abuse, requesting backup and child services. Immediate response needed." When he returned, Lana looked up at him with an expression that was equal parts fear and hope. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martinez crouched beside the open car door, his gaze level with hers. "Right now, you're safe. That's all you need to think about. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. What if he finds me?" Her voice cracked, and her grip on the backpack tightened. "He won't," Martinez said firmly. "I won't let him. Do you trust me?" Lana hesitated, her lower lip trembling. Finally, she nodded. "Good," Martinez said, his tone softening. "What's your name?" "Lana." "Okay, Lana. I'm Detective Martinez, and I'm going to take care of you. I promise." As he climbed into the driver's seat, Martinez's mind raced. He didn't know the full story yet, but what he had seen and heard so far was enough to stir the protective instincts he thought he had long buried. The car rumbled to life, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Martinez glanced at Lana in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, her eyes wide and searching. The fear was still there, but so was something else, a flicker of hope, fragile but unmistakable. "You're safe now," Martinez said softly, his voice more to himself than to her. "No one's going to hurt you again." For the first time that night, Lana exhaled deeply. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that things might change. The drive to Lana's house was short but felt endless. As the patrol car rolled down the uneven streets, Martinez stole glances at Lana in the rearview mirror. She sat rigid, her backpack clutched tightly against her chest, her wide eyes staring out at the darkened landscape. Her earlier sobs had subsided into silence, but her fear was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. "Are you sure about this?" Martinez asked, his voice measured. "You don't have to go back. We can handle this another way." Lana shook her head quickly, her grip tightening on the straps of her backpack. "I have to show you," she murmured. "So you can believe me." Martinez's chest tightened at her words. He believed her. He had believed her the moment she stumbled into his arms, terrified and broken. But he didn't press her further. If going back was what she needed to feel heard, he would follow her lead. The house came into view at the edge of town, a shabby two-story structure that looked like it had been forgotten by time. The paint was peeling, the porch sagging under years of neglect, and the yard was littered with debris. A single, dim light glowed from the front window, casting eerie shadows across the overgrown lawn. Martinez parked the car a few feet away from the house, his hand instinctively resting near his holstered weapon as he stepped out. Lana hesitated before following, her movements slow and reluctant. She hovered close to his side, her small frame dwarfed by his towering presence. As they approached the front door, the air grew heavier, saturated with the sour stench of alcohol and decay. Martinez knocked firmly, the sound echoing through the silent night. It wasn't long before the door creaked open, revealing a man who seemed to embody the house's disrepair. He was disheveled and unkempt, his greasy hair hanging in limp strands around his face. Bloodshot eyes narrowed as he took in Martinez, and then landed on Lana. "What the hell is this?" the man barked, his voice slurred and hostile. "What are you doing here, girl?" Lana flinched, shrinking behind Martinez. The detective's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Detective Martinez," he said evenly, pulling out his badge. "We've received a report of mistreatment in this household. I'm here to make sure everything is in order." The man's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mistreatment? From her? That kid's a troublemaker. She's always lying, always running off. You don't know the half of it." "I'll decide what's true," Martinez replied, his tone firm. "Step aside so I can take a look around." The man's eyes flicked between Martinez and Lana, his jaw working as if he were grinding his teeth. For a moment, Martinez thought he might resist, but then the man stepped back with a sneer, muttering curses under his breath. As Martinez stepped inside, the stench of stale beer and sweat hit him like a wall. The living room was a disaster. Empty bottles littered the floor, dirty laundry piled in the corners, and the furniture was stained and sagging. On the coffee table sat a frayed belt and a broken hairbrush, both smeared with what looked like dried blood. "Everything okay here?" the man asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "See any mistreatment, detective?" Martinez ignored him, his trained eyes scanning the room for details. Each object told a story, and none of them were good. He noticed Lana hovering near the doorway, her arms wrapped protectively around herself as she avoided her father's gaze. "Where's her room?" Martinez asked, his voice sharp. The man waved a dismissive hand. "Upstairs. Third door on the right. But you won't find anything up there, just more of her mess." Martinez turned to Lana. "Stay close," he said gently, nodding for her to follow. The narrow staircase creaked under their weight as they ascended. Lana's breathing was shallow, her eyes darting nervously around as if expecting danger to leap from the shadows. When they reached the room, Martinez pushed the door open slowly. The sight inside made his stomach churn. The room was bare, the walls stained with water damage and scuffed with marks. The mattress on the floor was thin and frayed, with no sheets or blankets to speak of. A single wooden box sat in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. "Is this your room?" Martinez asked, his voice tight. Lana nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "What's in the box?" he pressed. Lana hesitated before stepping forward and kneeling beside it. She opened the lid slowly, revealing a collection of photographs, documents, and small trinkets. Martinez crouched beside her, his eyes narrowing as he examined the items. The photographs were old, some faded with age. Most featured a smiling woman with dark hair, holding a young Lana in her arms. Martinez's breath caught in his throat as he picked up one of the pictures. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lana glanced at the photo, her expression unreadable. "My mom," she said quietly. Her name was Julia. Martinez's hands trembled slightly as he sifted through the documents beneath the photos. A birth certificate caught his eye. His heart stopped when he saw the name written at the top, Lana Martinez. He froze, the paper slipping slightly in his hands. His mind raced as he processed the name, the photos, the resemblance. It couldn't be, but it was. "You're my daughter," he whispered, the words falling from his lips before he could stop them. Lana's head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before Martinez could respond, a voice cut through the heavy silence. "I see you found out," the man drawled from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, a twisted grin on his face. Martinez stood slowly, his body tense with barely contained rage. "You knew," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Martinez's world tilted, the ground beneath him feeling unsteady as the weight of the birth certificate in his hand grew unbearable. His daughter. Lana was his daughter. The thought hit him like a tidal wave, sweeping away every other concern and leaving him breathless. "Start talking," he said, his voice low and sharp as he turned to the man leaning smugly against the doorway. The man's lips curled into a smirk, but there was no humor in it. "Figured you'd figure it out eventually," he said, crossing his arms casually. "Didn't think you'd go digging through her stuff to find out, though." Martinez's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The muscles in his neck strained as he fought to keep his temper in check. "You knew who I was," he demanded, his tone dangerous. "And you didn't think to tell me? What kind of person does that?" The man shrugged lazily, like the answer didn't matter. "Julia told me you weren't in the picture. Said you didn't want anything to do with her or the kid. So, when she died, I figured, why bother? Social services wanted to take her away, and I wasn't about to let that happen. You kept her out of the system to protect her?" Martinez spat, his voice heavy with disdain. "You think this is protection? Look around you. She's terrified of you." The man's smirk faltered for a moment, his gaze shifting to the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck as if the weight of Martinez's words had struck him. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he mumbled. "After Julia died, things just fell apart. I tried, at first. I really did. But it was hard. Bills kept piling up. I started drinking. I know I screwed up, okay? Screwed up." Martinez took a step closer, his voice rising. "You think screwed up explains the bruises on her arms? The fear in her eyes? The hell she's been living in this house?" The man flinched but didn't answer. His shoulders sagged, and he turned his face away. "Sit down," Martinez snapped, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Don't move until I tell you to." The man hesitated, his eyes darting to Lana before finally slinking away to the sagging armchair in the corner of the living room. He collapsed into it, his head falling into his hands. Martinez turned to Lana, who had retreated to the corner of the room, her small frame folded into itself. She hugged her knees to her chest, her wide eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. "Lana," he said softly, crouching to meet her gaze. She flinched at first, her gaze darting to his face. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are you really my dad?" The question sent a pang through Martinez's chest. He wanted to deny it, to pretend this revelation wasn't real. But he couldn't. The truth stared back at him from the photographs and the birth certificate. He nodded, his throat tight. Yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know, Lana. If I had, I would have been there for you. I swear. Her expression shifted, confusion, anger, and sadness all flickering across her face. Why didn't you know? She asked, her tone sharp with hurt. Why weren't you there? It's complicated, Martinez said, his voice heavy with regret. Your mom and I, we lost touch. I didn't even know she had you. If I had known, things would have been different. Tears welled up in Lana's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. I don't know what to believe, she said, her voice cracking. Everything's so messed up. Martinez hesitated before reaching out, his hand hovering near hers. I know it's a lot, he said gently. But I'm here now. I'm going to make this right. I promise. To his relief, Lana didn't pull away when he rested his hand over hers. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, a tentative bridge forming between them. After a moment, Martinez stood, determination hardening his features. We're leaving, he said firmly. You're not staying here another night. Lana's eyes widened in alarm. But what about him? She asked, her voice barely audible. Don't worry about him, Martinez said, his tone resolute. I'll handle it. Together, they gathered her few belongings. Martinez felt his chest tighten as he saw the simplicity of her life. A few clothes, a worn teddy bear, and the wooden box of keepsakes. It was all she had. As they descended the stairs, the man in the living room looked up, his bloodshot eyes filled with something resembling regret. You can't just take her, he said, his voice weak. She's all I've got left of Julia. Martinez paused, gripping the wooden box tightly. You had your chance to care for her, he said coldly. You failed. Now it's my turn. The man didn't argue. He slumped back in his chair, defeated, as Martinez led Lana out the door. The night air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the house. Lana clutched her backpack tightly, her eyes scanning the dark street nervously. You're safe now, Martinez said, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Lana looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Are you sure? She asked quietly. Martinez nodded, his gaze unwavering. I'm sure. For the first time that night, Lana allowed herself a small, tentative smile. Together, they walked toward the patrol car, leaving the house and its shadows behind. The drive away from the house was heavy with silence. Lana sat in the passenger seat of Martinez's patrol car, her small frame hunched as she stared out the window. She clutched the wooden box tightly in her lap, her fingers tracing the edges of its worn lid. Martinez stole glances at her, his mind racing with questions and emotions he didn't yet know how to address. Are you okay? He asked finally, breaking the silence. Lana hesitated, then nodded. I think so, she said, her voice small. But, what's going to happen now? Martinez tightened his grip on the steering wheel. First, I'm taking you somewhere safe. After that, we'll figure everything out together. Lana nodded again, though her expression remained clouded with uncertainty. They pulled into the lot of a nearby station, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the pavement. Martinez helped Lana out of the car and guided her inside, where the night desk officer glanced up in surprise. Raul, what's going on? The officer asked, his gaze shifting to Lana. Situation with a minor, Martinez said tersely. I need to make a report and get child services involved. In the meantime, I'll need access to the quiet room. The officer nodded and led them down a corridor to a small, comfortably furnished room with a couch, a table, and a few chairs. Martinez gestured for Lana to sit while he stepped outside to make a call. From the hallway, he could see her through the glass window, sitting stiffly on the couch and clutching the box as if it were a shield. The sight made his heart ache. When he returned, he sat across from her at the table. Lana, he began carefully, I need to know more about what's been happening at that house. It's important for the report. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the table. Do I have to? I know it's hard, Martinez said gently. But the more you tell me, the better I can help you. Lana swallowed hard, then began to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted the years of neglect and abuse. She described the shouting, the punishments, the time she had gone to bed hungry because there wasn't enough food, or because her father was angry. Martinez listened in silence, his hands clenched tightly under the table. Every word cut deeper, his guilt and anger mixing into a volatile storm inside him. When she finished, there was a long pause. Finally, Martinez spoke. "You didn't deserve any of that," he said, his voice thick. "None of it. And it's over now. Do you understand? You'll never have to go back there." Lana nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The quiet moment was broken by a knock at the door. The night officer stepped in, his expression grim. "Raul, you've got company," he said. Martinez frowned. "Who?" "Her. The guy from the house," the officer said hesitantly. "He's here. Says he wants to talk to you." Martinez's blood ran cold. He stood abruptly, his jaw tightening. "Stay here," he said to Lana, his voice firm but reassuring. "I'll handle this." Out in the main lobby, the man was pacing, his disheveled appearance even worse under the harsh lighting. When he saw Martinez, his movements stilled, and he approached with a mix of bravado and desperation. "You can't just take her," he said, his voice rising. "She's my responsibility. You don't have the right." "I have every right," Martinez interrupted, his tone icy. "You lost any claim to responsibility the moment you laid a hand on her." The man flinched but quickly recovered. "I made mistakes, all right? But she's all I've got left of Julia. You think I don't love her? You think I wanted this? If you loved her, you would have protected her," Martinez snapped, stepping closer. "You would have given her a safe home. Instead, you let your grief and your anger destroy her childhood. You failed her." The man's face twisted in anger and despair. "What do you want me to say? That I'm a monster? Fine. I'm a monster. But she's my family." Martinez's voice lowered, dangerously calm. "She's my family too. And I'll be damned if I let you hurt her again." For a moment, the man looked as though he might argue. But then his shoulders slumped, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. "What happens now?" he asked hoarsely. "Now, she gets the life she deserves," Martinez said. "And you stay out of it." The man nodded slowly, his gaze falling to the floor. He turned and shuffled toward the door, his steps heavy with defeat. Back in the quiet room, Martinez found Lana waiting anxiously. Her eyes searched his face as he entered. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He's gone," Martinez confirmed. "And he won't be coming back." Lana's shoulders sagged with relief, and for the first time, she set the wooden box aside. "Thank you," she whispered. Martinez smiled faintly, though the weight of the night still pressed heavily on him. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "It's what I should have done a long time ago." Lana looked at him, her expression softening. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." Martinez's throat tightened, but he nodded. "You're right," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere." The dawn broke over Las Cruces, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and gold. The patrol car hummed gently as it moved through the quiet streets. Lana sat beside Martinez, her head leaning against the window. Her wide, tired eyes watched the changing colors of the sky, her small frame wrapped in silence. For the first time in hours, she seemed less afraid, though the tight grip on the wooden box in her lap betrayed the lingering unease. Martinez stole a glance at her, the early morning light casting soft shadows on her face. She looked fragile, but there was a resilience in her eyes that stirred something deep in him. "Do you feel okay?" he asked, his voice low and careful, as if afraid to disturb the delicate calm in the car. Lana turned her head slightly, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "I think so," she said after a pause. "It's quiet." Martinez nodded, his gaze returning to the road. "Quiet is good," he replied. "You deserve some peace." The car turned onto a narrow street lined with modest homes, each one nestled under the sprawling arms of old oak trees. He pulled into the driveway of a small but well-kept house, its pale blue paint glowing softly in the morning light. This was his sister Maria's home, a place he trusted to be safe. Maria stood on the porch, her arms crossed but her face soft with concern. She was in her late 40s, her dark hair streaked with silver and tied back in a loose braid. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the girl in the passenger seat. When Martinez stepped out, she walked down the steps quickly, her sandals slapping against the wood. "Raul," she said, her voice low but firm. "What's going on?" "I'll explain everything," Martinez replied, his voice equally firm but tinged with weariness. He glanced toward Lana, who was still sitting in the car. "But I need a safe place for her right now. Just for a little while." Maria followed his gaze, her expression softening immediately. "Of course," she said gently. "Bring her inside." Martinez opened the car door and extended his hand to Lana. She hesitated for a moment, clutching the box tightly to her chest, before slipping her small hand into his. It was a tentative gesture, but it spoke volumes. As they walked up the steps together, Maria offered Lana a warm smile. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Maria," she said softly. "You're safe here." Lana nodded slightly, her wide eyes darting around the unfamiliar space as they entered the house. The living room was cozy, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon. Family photos hung on the walls, showcasing smiling faces at birthdays, graduations, and holidays. A soft knitted blanket was draped over the back of a plush armchair, and books filled the shelves that lined the room. Maria crouched slightly to meet Lana's eye level. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" she asked kindly. Lana shook her head but didn't release her grip on Martinez's hand. "All right," Maria said with a smile. "How about you sit down, and I'll make you something warm to drink." Maria disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a steaming mug of hot chocolate. She set it on the table in front of Lana, who stared at it hesitantly before reaching out to wrap her fingers around the warm ceramic. "You don't have to drink it if you don't want to," Maria assured her. "It's just there if you feel like it." Lana nodded, her grip on the mug tightening as she brought it closer. She didn't take a sip yet, but the warmth seemed to ease some of the tension in her shoulders. Martinez and Maria sat on the couch a few feet away, their voices low. "She's been through a lot, hasn't she?" Maria asked, her tone filled with quiet understanding. Martinez nodded, his jaw tightening. "More than any kid should have to," he said, his voice thick. "I've seen things like this before, but this is different." Maria placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "She's lucky to have you now." "She shouldn't have needed me now," Martinez muttered, guilt weighing heavily in his chest. "I should have been there from the beginning." Maria gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "What matters is that you're here now. And she knows that." Their conversation was interrupted by Lana's small voice. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her gaze fixed on Martinez. He turned to her, his expression softening. "Now," he said carefully, "we take it one step at a time. First, we make sure you're safe. After that, we'll figure out the rest together. You're not alone in this, Lana." She searched his face, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "You promise?" "I promise," Martinez said firmly. "I'll take care of you. I'll give you the life you deserve." For the first time that night, Lana's face softened. She nodded slowly and took a tentative sip of the hot chocolate. The faintest smile touched her lips. Maria leaned closer, her voice soft. "See, one step at a time." As the morning light filtered through the curtains, Martinez felt the weight of the night begin to lift. There was still so much to do, calls to make, reports to file, arrangements to finalize. But for now, he allowed himself to breathe, to take in this moment of peace. Lana sat on the couch, her small hands cradling the mug. She was still guarded, her eyes betraying the weight of the trauma she had endured, but there was a glimmer of something else, hope. Martinez knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. But as he watched Lana settle into the warmth of Maria's home, he made a silent vow. No matter what it took, he would protect her. He wasn't just her father now. He was her protector, her anchor, her second chance at a life free from fear. And he would not let her down.